the public agrees with that proposition by 82%. And so at this time, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Jim from Minnesota yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation in an appropriations bill and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriation bill shall not be in order if changing existing law. The amendment imposes additional duties. I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? Now, the Chair is prepared to rule. The Chair finds that this amendment includes language imparting direction. The amendment therefore constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2, Rule 21. Point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. For what purpose? Which one? California. California. What purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is the, I believe, 6th time that I've come to the floor during this Congress to call for disclosure and full transparency throughout the federal government. So this is not my first time on the floor on this issue. I've risen on many bills, and I will continue to, because I think it's really critical to help restore the confidence of the American people in their government and how it operates. I maintain the view, and it's shared by the majority of the American people, that transparency in the use of our tax dollars is absolutely critical. I want to pay tribute to my colleague, Mr. Ellison, for offering this amendment, and that together we support it and offer it to the full House. I believe that with public dollars comes public responsibilities. There are thousands of companies who do business with the federal government, and they receive billions of dollars, of public dollars, for their services and products. And I think that all of our constituents deserve to know whether and how they spend these dollars and whether they're used to influence our elections. The amendment I'm offering with Congressman Ellison will provide this transparency by requiring that post-award contractors or subcontractors, which is very important. We don't want to interfere with the contracting process whatsoever. But once they've been awarded a contract, requiring disclosure of all political contributions should be the norm of the day. Disclosure is extraordinarily powerful because it puts the American people in the driver's seat. Constituents deserve to know who's involved in their elections and what their purpose might be. I think it's sad that just a few days ago the United States Senate killed the Disclose Act. A sad day for the Congress, but I think the American people are taking note. Anyone who supports the Citizens United decision, which I don't, legalizing corporate expenditures, should know that 8 out of 9 Supreme Court justices endorsed prompt disclosure. Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote, "Disclosure permits citizens and shareholders to react to the speech of corporate entities in a proper way." Now, Republicans supported disclosure before they were against it. And I would hope that my Republican colleagues would come back into the fold. There's no reason to oppose transparency and disclosure unless someone really wants to hide anything. And I don't think any of us want to hide behind the hiding. It just is not good government. And the American people, the people that we're here to represent, have the privilege of representing, deserve more information and not less. We can bring this about by adopting this policy, and I urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Florida, for what purpose?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, but I do have a question for the chairman, if I could.
Just state your question.
This issue was talking about an amendment that was ruled out of order. Is it germane for her to be talking about an amendment that is ruled out of order?
The gentlelady offered a pro forma amendment to the bill under the 5-minute rule, striking the last word. Yes, it was. Is the gentleman prepared to go forward with his amendment?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Stearns of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used by the Secretary of Defense to implement an enrollment fee for the TRICARE for Life program under Chapter 55 of Title 10 United States Code that does not exist as of the date of enactment of this Act.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer an amendment that prohibits funds made available through this Act to implement a new enrollment fee for TRICARE for Life beneficiaries. The Department of Defense may have the authority to raise fees and implement new enrollment fees unless specified by Congress prohibiting such authority. Last year, through the FY 2012 DoD authorization appropriation process, the administration increased enrollment fees for TRICARE Prime beneficiaries for the first time since 1995. My amendment will ensure the administration does not implement a first-time ever enrollment fee for TRICARE for Life beneficiaries. For fiscal year 2013, the administration proposed additional fees and cost-sharing increases, a new enrollment fee for TRICARE for Life, aggressive increases in pharmacy co-payments, and a cap of $3,000 per family. On April 17, 2012, I expressed my opposition to these proposals that were made by this administration on the House floor to raise such fees for our service members and veterans. I quoted the President in a speech he gave about veterans being, quote, shortchanged, end quote. Then Senator Barack Obama said on May 18, 2006, and I quote, "When a young man or woman goes off and serves the country in the military, they should be treated with the utmost dignity and respect when they come home." End quote. Mr. President, this is at least one thing I can fully agree with you on. Passage of this bill will mark the third consecutive annual decrease in total DoD funding, including overseas contingency operation, since FY 2010. I understand budget cuts need to be made, and obviously we need to get our fiscal house in order. But my colleagues, we owe our veterans quality health care for their service and their sacrifice. We promised to take care of our troops when they came home. As a veteran myself, I can appreciate knowing that our country's support for our troops is not limited to strictly the battlefield. It is unconscionable that this administration seeks to raise health care costs in more than 9.3 million veterans and their families that are currently eligible for TRICARE when there are other excesses that can surely be cut. For example, we should limit funds to Pakistan before giving DoD the option to raise costs on our veterans. We heard adequately yesterday on members' opposition to Pakistan for closing supply routes since November 2011 that are necessary for providing our troops in Afghanistan necessary supplies and resources. So I ask members of this Congress to consider alternative avenues to cut spending before we require 3.3 million veterans that are eligible for TRICARE for Life to sacrifice even further. I'd like to submit for the record letters of support from the Veterans of Foreign War, the VFW, and the American Legion for my amendment prohibiting funds from this Act to be used to implement an enrollment fee for the TRICARE for Life program.
Covered by general leave.
The Military Association of America also in support of this effort. Mr. Chairman, the administration's proposal to increase health care costs on our military represents a very serious breach of faith, as it is taxes on the oldest cohort of military retirees and their families. So I conclude by asking my colleagues to support my amendment, and by doing so we honor the promises made to our brave men and women who have sacrificed so much for the freedom that we all enjoy. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the Stearns Amendment would prohibit funds from being used to implement an enrollment fee for the TRICARE for Life program. The Department of Defense does not currently have the authority to establish such a fee, but did submit a legislative proposal to do so. The House-passed National Defense Authorization Act chose not to adopt the legislative request that would give the Department this authority. While this defense appropriations bill does not have the jurisdiction on TRICARE issues, we support strongly what Mr. Stearns intends to do, so we accept the amendment.
Wait, I'm sorry. The gentleman from Florida controls the time.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman yield to the gentleman from Florida? Does the chairman yield to the gentleman from Florida, or does the chairman yield back?
If the gentleman would like me to yield to him, I will yield to him. I didn't realize that he wanted me to yield.
No,
yes, I yield to the gentleman.
I just want to say to distinguished former chairman of the Appropriations, chairman for Emeritus, and also chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee that I appreciate his endorsement. Notwithstanding with that, I would say to him his acceptance is good, but I think the floor should have a vote on this. With that, I yield back. I yield to the chairman.
Now I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all Floridians yield back their time. Is there any other discussion on this particular amendment? What's the purpose of the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? To this amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Okay. Any other discussion? The question is then on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. For what purpose now does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to enter into a contract using procedures that do not give to small businesses concerns owned and controlled by veterans, as that term is defined in Section 3Q3 of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 632Q3, that are included in the database under Section 8127F of Title 38 United States Code. Any preference available with respect to such contract, except for a preference given to small business concerns owned and controlled by service-disabled veterans, as that term defined in Section 3Q2 of Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 632Q2.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman reserves a point of order. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For generations, brave young men and women from across the United States have answered the call of duty in service of our nation. Now, as the conflicts on foreign fields continue to wind down, we must ensure that we do not lose sight of the need to care for and provide for our returning veterans. Our nation has learned from generations of veterans that war does not end when the camps are packed in, the planes are grounded, the ships are docked, and our soldiers set foot on American soil. General Washington once reminded us that the willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive the veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by their nation. However, during these difficult economic times, our veterans are still faced with challenges as they return to civilian life. In March of this year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that among veterans who have served in the post-9/11 era, the unemployment rate is 12%, higher than the national average. Among young male veterans under the age of 24, the unemployment rate is 29%. Nearly one-third are unemployed. One unemployed veteran is one too many, but these statistics demonstrate an economic reality which is quite unacceptable. It is important to understand that this hardship comes not from a lack of willingness to work by our veterans, but rather from a lack of opportunity. Consider that according to the most recent census, over 2.4 million of our nation's veterans are now small business owners. Veteran-owned companies now make up 9% of all U.S. firms. The Small Business Administration now estimates that 1 in 7 veterans are self-employed or are a small business owner. And finally, nearly a quarter of veterans say they're interested in starting or in buying their own business. So our veterans continue to do their part. It is clear that our nation's veterans are ready and willing to invest in our economy if we provide them with the opportunities they seek and, quite frankly, with the opportunities that they deserve. With the President's announcement earlier this year that all of our young men and women will be home from Afghanistan within the next 2 years, we as a community and as a country must begin working now to ensure that we are providing our returning servicemen and women with job opportunities as they seek to reintegrate into civilian life. To address this, I've authored legislation called the Fairness to Veterans Act to provide the same preferences given to other preference groups in federal contracting. It levels the playing field for veteran-owned businesses to help get our economy moving and our veterans back to work. This amendment furthers the goal of the Fairness to Veterans Act. As our nation struggles to achieve an economic recovery, we should be looking to utilize the talent and leadership skills of our nation's veterans. These men and women volunteered to selflessly serve our country, and in order to succeed, must display self-discipline and leadership. It is character traits like these that should be nurtured and fostered to help our economy grow again. Ultimately, all of our efforts in the House must be focused on putting our constituents back to work, and this legislation will do just that by creating new opportunities for our veterans. With the passage of this amendment, we will be one step closer to leveling the playing field for our veterans. The guidelines included in this amendment will provide veteran-owned businesses with the access they need to grow and to create jobs. The skill sets possessed by our highly trained veterans are unmatched across the globe. In fact, our fighting men and women are unquestionably the most highly trained, highly skilled workforce in history. It is critical that we fully utilize their expertise to put our economy back on the right track. The men and women of the military have risked their lives in service to us. This amendment is our opportunity to begin to repay that incredible debt. With that, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment in furtherance of working with staff to institute this policy of fairness to veterans in a way that will benefit our returning veterans and benefit our country.
Mr. Chairman, reserving the right to object.
The gentleman is recognized on your reservation.
I would say to the gentleman from Pennsylvania that what he wants to do, I want to share with him and to help him do that. I had to, under the rules, reserve the point of order, but I would hope that the gentleman would let us be part of this effort to accomplish what it is he wants to do within the rules. So I withdraw my reservation on his request to withdraw.
The gentleman withdraws his reservation. Is there any objection to the withdrawal of the amendment?
I thank the Chairman, and I look forward to working with you.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my reservation on point of order.
Okay. The amendment has been withdrawn. Gentleman from Ohio, for what purpose?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Kucinich of Ohio. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to enter into a contract with any person or other entity listed in the Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity Information System, FAPIIS, as having been convicted of 1, fraud against the federal government.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My amendment's simple. It says if you seek to be a Department of Defense contractor and you have previously defrauded the federal government, you shouldn't be able to receive a contract from the DoD. According to the Congressional Research Service in fiscal 2010, the Department of Defense obligated $366 billion to contracts, which is 54% more than half of a total of Department of Defense obligations. There are rules and regulations in place that prevent federal contracts from going to entities that have broken the law. Under the Federal Acquisitions Regulation, federal agencies are required to award contracts only to responsible sources. And Federal Acquisition Regulations, Subpart 9, 104-1 states that a satisfactory record of integrity and business ethics is one of the general standards of responsibility. But the term responsible is not explicitly defined anywhere in the law. And I know that we cannot try to define new terms using the amendment process, and that's not what we're trying to do here. The fact is that someone could commit fraud against the government and still get a contract with the Department of Defense, and that's wrong. We have to make clear that companies who have defrauded the taxpayers should not be able to get more DoD contracts. So this is, I'd like to point out that the underlying bill being debated here contains a specific prohibition against the use of Department of Defense funds and contracts with anyone who has an unpaid tax liability. Again, a party bidding on government contracts is supposed to affirm that they have no unpaid tax liability. So the point of this amendment is to make it absolutely clear that contract fraud against the American taxpayer will not be tolerated. According to groups like the Project on Government Oversight, which is only able to track the number of known and disclosed settlements, there have been dozens of instances of contractors committing government contract fraud since 1995. And of those dozens that are known to have committed this fraud, a total of $544 million in fines were paid. That's a tiny amount, really, when you're talking about in terms of fines compared to the billions appropriated for Department of Defense contracts in the last decade. Bottom line, if you defraud the taxpayer, you should lose your privilege to receive more taxpayers' money. So I would urge the adoption of this amendment.
The gentleman yields back.
I yield back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Florida.
rise to strike the last word.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I will not oppose this amendment because I want to make sure that the Defense Department does not hire bad contractors. And I agree with Mr. Kucinich strongly on this issue. The only comment that I would make is we've just seen this amendment just a few minutes ago, and we had not really had time to analyze so that if we could make any further explanation. But I'm not going to oppose the amendment. I suspect it's going to pass. It probably should, because none of us want the Defense Department to hire bad contractors. Good job, Mr. Kucinich.
I want to, if I may, would the gentleman yield?
Gentleman yields back.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on this amendment? For what purpose the gentleman from North Carolina rise? Oh, I'm sorry. 1 sec. The question now is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from North Carolina. Gentleman has an amendment in the desk. The clerk will report it.
Amendment number 17, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Jones of North Carolina.
Yes, the gentleman from Florida.
I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman reserves a point of order. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And even though the chairman has a point of order, I want to explain why I think this amendment is important. I am working with Rosa DeLauro on this amendment. This amendment simply says that any long-term security agreement with Afghanistan must be conducted as a treaty or authorized by Congress. In 2008, this Congress was outraged that a long-term security agreement would be concluded without input from Congress. I wonder where the outrage is today. We're in worse financial shape than we were in 2008, and I would hope that Congress would see that we have a need and a responsibility. This agreement signed last month was submitted to the Afghan Parliament, but not to the United States Congress. Where is the outrage? My colleague, Ms. DeLauro, led the effort in the House in 2008 to return Congress to its constitutional responsibility. We must decide when and where our men and women go to fight. I would like to commend Ms. DeLauro for having the courage to help lead this effort again today. No matter who is the president, it is the responsibility of Congress to commit U.S. troops and fund this agreement. Mr. Speaker, there are estimates that say that we will be up to 30,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan until 2024. This will cost over $500 billion. And yet, if we don't support legislation like we're talking about today, we will have no say at all. I don't know why the taxpayers aren't outraged by what is happening with this national security agreement with Afghanistan. The fact remains we simply don't have what the numbers are going to be and the cost is going to be with this national security agreement with Afghanistan. We in Congress have a responsibility. Our responsibility is to make sure that we have checks and balances with any administration. When our country is in such a bad financial situation, to know that hopefully we will not allow a 10-year agreement to just slide by Congress with $500 billion at stake and maybe even more of our young men and women being killed. Mr. Speaker, just a couple more minutes. I have a very dear friend that is the former Commandant of the Marine Corps. I have an arrangement with him that I will not use his name in a public forum, but any of my friends here today, the chairman or ranking member, ask me his name, I'll come up and tell you. I sent him an email after we signed this security agreement with Afghanistan. I said to the former Commandant, what do you think about this agreement? I got 3 paragraphs back, but I will read just a couple of sentences. He wrote, and I quote the Commandant, the former Commandant, simply put, I am not in favor of the agreement signed. It basically keeps the United States in Afghanistan to prop up a corrupt regime. It continues to place our troops at risk. I know that my friend from Connecticut will speak in just a moment, and I look forward to her words. But I hope that the Congress in 2013, no matter who the President is, will bring this issue back, and let's have a debate in the House of Representatives, and let's say to the American people, we will meet our responsibility. We will not send troops, we will not send money to Afghanistan unless the Congress itself approves it. And again, Mr. Chairman, I have great respect for you and the ranking member. I'm sorry he's leaving. He's been a great member of the Congress. But I hope, Mr. Chairman, if we all get back in 2013, we will have an opportunity to bring this issue to the floor of the Congress and debate the role of Congress when any president, Democrat or Republican, reaches a security agreement that obligates our troops and the taxpayers. We must meet our constitutional responsibility. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation in an appropriations bill, and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriations bill shall not be in order if changing existing law. This amendment requires a new determination, and I ask for the ruling from the chair.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? Gentlelady from Connecticut.
Mr. Chairman, I rise against the point of order.
Nice.
The bipartisan amendment that Congressman Jones and I offer ensures that any security agreement between the United States and Afghanistan will not be legal unless it comes in the form of a treaty or is specifically authorized by a law. The gentleman's point of order argues that this amendment requires the Secretary of Defense to know the definition of, quote, any agreement with the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan that includes security assurances for mutual defense. While this definition is not written into statute, it is common sense. I also believe our responsibility under the Constitution takes precedence over this point of order. As it is, this point would cut into the heart of our constitutional duties as a Congress under Article 1, Section 8. The power to declare war has been entrusted to the Congress and to the Congress alone. At the recent NATO summit in Chicago, President Obama and NATO leaders announced an end to combat operations in Afghanistan in 2013, and the transition of lead responsibility for security to the Afghan government by the end of 2014. But even though bin Laden is dead and al-Qaeda has been decimated, the administration also announced an agreement with the government of Afghanistan that would keep an untold number of American troops there until 2024, 12 years from now.
Please suspend. We'll confine her remarks simply to the issue of the point of order.
Okay. Well, with regard to that, whether you agree or disagree with the policy, it's imperative for our form of government that Congress be consulted on any such agreement that maintains our troops abroad, or for that matter, any defense or status of forces agreement that's made by the United States. It is our task as representatives of the people to debate the critical issues and to make the ultimate decision whether to put or keep our troops in harm's way. This amendment simply will ensure this relationship with Afghanistan, that no defense agreement will be enacted without the ultimate consult of the Congress as mandated by our Constitution.
The gentlelady will suspend again. Once again, not to the policy issue, but addressing the point of order itself.
Well, I will conclude by saying that I urge the Chair to overrule the point of order, allow this amendment to receive an up or down vote.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Is there any other discussion to the point of order? The Chair is prepared to rule. The Chair finds that this amendment addresses funds in other acts and includes language requiring a new determination. The amendment therefore constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21. The point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. For what purpose the gentleman from Washington rise?
I move to strike the last word, to engage in a colloquy with Chairman Young.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise to seek the Chairman's support in addressing an issue which he is deeply and painfully aware: the rapidly increasing number of cases of amputations, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury suffered by our brave young men and women returning from combat theaters. Of course, these conditions can have a devastating impact on military dependents. They are also having an increasingly devastating impact on the military health care system that serves our soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and other families. There is no one who has worked harder than the chairman of our subcommittee to ensure that the very best medical care is available to the 9 million Americans who have earned the benefits of our military health care system. Yet I remain concerned that newer, innovative practices are not being sufficiently integrated into the military medical system. One such innovative practice is systems medicine. By more rapidly and accurately quantifying wellness and deciphering illness and disease, systems medicine will promote translational research by linking the department's research and development programs, initiatives, and laboratories with its clinical care program, initiatives, and facilities. And I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The former chairman of this subcommittee is absolutely correct. Current strains on our military and fiscal resources are causing unprecedented challenges in maintaining a viable, cost-effective military health care system. And he has probably heard me discuss this more than he wants to over the years. But it is a serious, important issue. It is essential that new innovative approaches be more quickly included in military medical practice.
I ask the chairman to join me in urging the department to implement systems medicine into the medical practice of all service branches, to facilitate the training of DoD medical personnel in systems medicine. The Defense Department should consider systems medicine pilot projects that address post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, amputee health, along with other high-priority concerns that impact all aspects of total readiness, including mental resilience. And I yield to the chairman.
Again, I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just want to thank him for highlighting this issue today. And obviously, I plan to continue to work with him to do the best we can to make this happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose the gentleman from Kentucky rise? Gentleman moves to strike the last reading is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as we begin to wind down the debate on this defense bill, I wanted to take just a moment to pay tribute to this dynamic duo that we have, Bill Young and Norm Dix. The collective experience, wisdom, and knowledge of this defense bill and the actions of our military is almost unprecedented in this House. They have put forward a great bill in the highest bipartisan traditions of the House. And all of us in this body say thank you for the great service of these two stalwarts in this body. They have conducted themselves during this debate in the highest traditions of this House. They have collaborated together in a bipartisan way to help defend this country. And I think I speak for all members of the House of Representatives in saying thank you to these two great stalwarts of this body. This will be the last defense bill that Norm Dix will take part in. He is departing this body in retirement, and we will miss his wisdom and his camaraderie and his knowledge of the needs of our country in its defense. I think I speak for all of the House when I say thank you to Norm Dix for great service to his country, to this body, and to the defense of our country especially. We will miss his presence. We will miss his expertise. We will miss the fact that he is a jolly good fellow, among other things.
When my colleague yield,
I'll be happy to yield to the chairman.
I very much appreciate my chairman yielding. Just for a moment, I'd like to associate myself with your remarks regarding these two fabulous leaders and the jobs they have done over the years on our behalf and for our national security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, and I can't help but mention the great service the former chairman of this committee has rendered to the body as well.
Would the chairman yield?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to yield.
And thank you for yielding, and I wanted to say the same thing. Mr. Lewis chaired this subcommittee as well as the full committee. He did an outstanding job. Many innovations that came about during his 6 years as chairman of this subcommittee are with us today and will continue to be with us. The House is losing another great talent, another great dedicated public official, and I thank you for calling attention to his service.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Will the chairman yield?
I'll be happy to yield.
The three of you have grayer hair than I do, but and that means you have wisdom and experience along with it. But I just want to say I've enjoyed working with all three of you. Bill Young and I have worked together for many years. Jerry Lewis and I have worked many years, taken many trips to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to try to be with the troops and to find out what was going on. And we've had a good group. And it bothers me greatly when there's this sense out there that we can't work together. This committee works together. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud to be associated with my colleagues. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Young has mentioned briefly the service of our friend from California, Mr. Lewis, who, as we all know, served as chairman of the full committee for a period of time, and of course chairman of this great subcommittee. We're going to miss his presence because he is seeking greener pastures out there as well in retirement. And Jerry Lewis has been a stalwart member of this body for many, many years and has rendered great service to his country and certainly to this House, and most importantly, I think, on this subcommittee, because this subcommittee is in charge of defending our country. And there's no higher calling for any of us than to say we've been a part of that. So, Mr. Chairman, I wind my remarks up. We've had some 60 or 70 amendments on this bill, and I think the debate that took place is in the highest traditions of this body. I wish Mr. Lewis and Mr. Dick's happy retirements and other pursuits in life, and we wish you Godspeed. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from
Mr.
Washington?
Chairman, just for a brief moment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5
Thank you. So I strike the requisite number of words. One issue that didn't come up today was this question of what are we going to do at the end of this year with sequestration? And there was some discussion of an amendment. It didn't happen for points of order and other possible reasons. But I really believe that somehow we have got to avoid sequestration, and that collectively we've got to work together in the next several months, because I honestly believe that the economy of this country will be severely and adversely affected if we allow sequestration, both not just for defense, which we're talking about here today, but for the other part of the government, the discretionary domestic part of the government. We have got to avoid this. And I honestly believe I would love to see an agreement reached between the parties, between the leadership, so that we could get an agreement that is fair and balanced and equitable. I think if 4 of us and a couple others I could think of, I think we could put something like that together. But somehow it's got to happen, because the consequences to defense, and not only defense, but to the economy of the country is at stake here. CBO says that the difference in growth, if we do sequestration, if we don't deal with the tax issue, will go from 4.4% to 0.5%. So it's a 4.5% difference in economic growth. That means unemployment will be greater. That means the deficit will be greater. The whole idea of the Budget Control Act was to get the deficit under control. So again, I hope that we will all continue to think about how we can come up with a solution that's bipartisan, bicameral. We've got to work with the administration. But from a national security and a defense perspective, there is nothing more treacherous out there than sequestration. And we've got to avoid it. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. All time having been yielded back pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order: the Second Amendment of Mr. King of Iowa, the Fourth Amendment of Ms. Lee of California, the Fifth Amendment of Ms. Lee of California, an amendment by Mr. Moran of Virginia, an amendment by Mr. Turner of Ohio, amendment number 18 by Mr. Kaufman of Colorado, an amendment by Mr. Berg of North Dakota, an amendment by Mr. Garamendi of California, amendment number 1 by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina, amendment number 9 by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina, amendment by Mr. Stearns of Florida. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic votes after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on the Second Amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, on which the further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevail by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Second Amendment offered by Mr. King of Iowa.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted a sufficient number having risen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device, and this will be a 15-minute vote.
The House is voting for a second day on amendments to the Defense Department spending, $519 billion for the next budget year. This is the first of 11 votes. Iowa Republican Steve King offered this amendment on the Defense of Marriage Act. We spoke earlier today to a Capitol Hill reporter about the wrap-up of the defense appropriations bill in the House.
John Donnelly is a senior writer at Congressional Quarterly. Well, the House is closer to finishing this bill that covers funding of defense activities and programs for fiscal year 2013. How's the debate going?
It's moving along quite quickly, actually. They expected that they were going to go into Friday, but it looks like they're going to finish it on Thursday today.
Can you point for us at some of the key issues and tell us how, if at all, the bill's been changed during amendment debate that we've heard?
Well, there have been a few amendments that have passed. I guess most notably, there's been a cut to aid to Pakistan to reimburse them for their military efforts against insurgents on their territory. There's been some cuts to money for Afghanistan, too, a block in funding for new base closure rounds in the U.S. military here at home. But in general, the amount of money and some of the big weapons programs in particular have remained unchanged as a result of the debate.
What is the proposed spending level, and how does that figure with House Republicans' vision for the country's defense activities?
Well, the total amount is roughly $608 billion, and that includes $88.5 billion for war money, mostly Afghanistan, and $519.2 billion for the rest of the Defense Department's operations. I should point out that there are other spending bills, such as for nuclear weapons in the Energy Department and military construction, separate accounts. But the bill we're talking about here is the overwhelming majority of money that the United States spends each year for national security. How does it fit in with Republicans' vision? Well, clearly it reflects the GOP's support for strong defense and high defense spending. The amount of money is about $3 billion more than President Obama requested, and it's nearly $8 billion more than the Senate appropriators plan to allocate for defense, and the same $8 billion more than was stipulated in last year's Budget Control Act, the law that was passed during the debt ceiling debate last August.
Who is most opposed to this bill, and what are their chief concerns?
Well, I think the debate thus far has reflected liberals' concerns about the total amount of money for the Pentagon. They believe that the Defense Department has kind of gotten a free ride as compared to some of the domestic agencies. And so they have tried to do things like cut the overall amount of spending, cut funding for anything but a withdrawal from Afghanistan, cut money for particular programs such as bombers, intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles, missile defense programs, things that they consider to be Cold War relics.
How does this House bill compare with what the Senate might be working on?
Well, this will be more. There will be that $8 billion difference. The details we don't know yet because the Senate appropriators have not begun to write their bill. At least they haven't begun to mark it up. They're said to be done with it. They're just waiting to do the markup. They want to do that by the end of this month. So we don't know the detailed differences, but we do know that when they do have to reconcile the two bills, there will be that $8 billion difference. Which leads to, will they have to reconcile the bills? Will there be a conference? Will there even be a freestanding defense bill? The answer is probably no. The defense bill will probably get rolled into an omnibus, a megabus, or whatever kind of bus we're talking about this year. There also will probably be a continuing resolution, a stopgap spending measure that will keep the government going beyond the beginning of the fiscal year on October 1st because lawmakers will not have resolved the funding for probably any of the agencies by that time. So they'll need to keep things going.
Has there been any response from administration officials about the House bill?
Yes. The Obama administration has threatened to veto this bill and pretty much all the spending bills that the House Republicans have crafted because they want to allocate more than the administration requested or than the Budget Control Act stipulated. So because of the dollar amounts and because of administration concerns that the increase for defense was enabled by steep decreases in food stamps, medical care, and those type of programs, that's why the White House has threatened to veto.
So then how soon might the bill make it to the President's desk?
We really don't know because the Senate appropriators haven't started. And then there's so many things on Congress's plate as we enter the fall and the winter and the election period. You've got the Bush tax cuts and you've got the debt ceiling and of course the so-called sequestration, the automatic budget cuts that are slated to start in January. This makes for a lot of business, so any prediction as to when pretty much anything will happen in this Congress it would not be a wise thing to make.
John Donnelly writes for Congressional Quarterly. We thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Still to come, 10 more amendment votes to the defense spending bill, to be followed by a final passage vote. House Speaker John Boehner today accused President Obama of a lack of leadership of the automatic spending cuts in defense and other areas as part of the 2011 debt ceiling agreement. Speaker Boehner said President Obama only agreed to sequestration so he could only have to deal with the debt ceiling once before the election. Here's more from the Speaker's briefing today.
Morning, everyone. You know, American people are looking at the President's economic policies and asking the question, where are the jobs? This week, an independent report from Ernst & Young indicating that the President's call for increased taxes will cost our economy more than 700,000 jobs. Now, why are Democrats willing to support a tax hike that will hit thousands of small businesses at a time when our economy is struggling? I think the President explained himself when he told American job creators, you didn't build that. The President believes the job creators and entrepreneurs of this country owe their success to the government. He's telling American small business entrepreneurs, in effect, so you owe us, and now it's time to pay up. That philosophy explains a lot about the President's economic policies and why they failed, because they're completely wrong. Our nation was built on the sacrifices and the hard work of small business entrepreneurs, and frankly, we ought to be thanking them. We owe them a government that stays out of their way and gives them the freedom to grow, create jobs, and to pursue the American dream. We need to stop all the coming tax hikes and lay the groundwork for tax reform that closes loopholes and lowers rates for all, including American companies. This will keep jobs here in America and bring some of the jobs that have gone overseas back home. And the House will lay the groundwork for this type of reform in the coming weeks. The President's small business tax hike will hit nearly the same time as our military is being hit with arbitrary cuts that will endanger our security. These are the same cuts the President's own Secretary of Defense says will hollow out our armed forces. The sequester is happening because the President didn't lead. He wanted an increase in the debt ceiling without spending cuts and reforms that are truly needed to reduce our deficit and our debt. He wanted an increase in the debt ceiling so that he wouldn't have to deal with it twice before his election. So rather than agree to tax and entitlement reforms that everyone knows that are needed, the President and Senate Democrats gave us the sequester, promising that the cuts would never actually happen. And now some of those same Democrats are threatening to drive us off the fiscal cliff and tank our economy, all in their quest for higher taxes. The House has already passed legislation to replace the looming defense cuts with common sense reforms. We've done our job. But the President hasn't lifted a finger to work with the Congress on jobs or to resolve these big issues. He doesn't even have time to meet with his own Jobs Council. He's just out there campaigning every day and looking for somebody else to blame. Listen, Republicans only control 1/3 of our government. But we're the only ones in town who have offered a plan to address both the threat to our security that's posed by the defense sequester and the threat to our economy posed by the coming tax hike. Listen, Republicans are leading on jobs, and while this White House is checked out, and I frankly think the American people deserve better.
Speaker Boehner, in regards to the tremendous drought that's affecting the Midwest.
Nice doctor you have on this morning, by the way.
Laundry day. Sorry, sir. But there was a little interview with you in Washington State in 2007. It's on YouTube called Boehner Sockless. So I digress.
Only I didn't have a tie on.
Terrible drought affecting the Midwest.
It's a really simple rule. If you have a tie on, you should be wearing socks. Do you have a question?
Drought affecting the Midwest. There is some speculation, and Senate Democrats, in fact, say they would like to try some disaster relief to the Farm Bill. What is Congress prepared to do to help out those farmers whose crops are being decimated by this drought?
Well, there's no question that there's a real threat throughout the Midwest because of the dry conditions. Most farmers that in my district avail themselves of crop insurance. That's why it's in the Farm Bill. That's why our government subsidizes the cost of crop insurance to encourage farmers to buy that. And in most cases, it should be sufficient to deal with this problem.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask you, and with the indulgence of my colleagues, is there a memorable or favorite moment that you have of the convention, either as a kid or a teenager watching it or as an attendee, that you could share with us?
Well, I think when I had the chance to chair the 2008 convention and address the convention was probably the highlight of my convention moments.
Following up on Luke's question, what do you plan to do with the Farm Bill that the Agriculture Committee has passed?
No decisions have been made on the Farm Bill as yet.
Speaker Boehner,
Is there
Congressman...
a timetable for you making a decision? I mean, last week you said there's no decision, and then all your people ran around and said we're not going to do the Farm Bill. Now this week you're saying no decision.
No decision has been made.
When you'll have a decision?
When we have one, we'll let you know. Thanks.
So you're going to leave Lucas hanging out?
Speaker Boehner, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann sent a letter to, and 4 other House Republicans sent a letter to State Department IG and other IGs about the influence of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in the federal government, and specifically mentioned Huma Abedin, the Deputy Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and basically said that she had ties to the Muslim Brotherhood through her family, and they also showed then that the State Department's policies have become more friendly to the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic groups. Do you have those concerns? What do you think it's appropriate that she and these members would ask for this letter, especially as a member of the House Intelligence Committee?
Well, I haven't seen the letter, and I don't know Yuma, but from everything that I do know of her, she has a sterling character. And I think accusations like this being thrown around are pretty dangerous.
Would you consider taking her off the Intelligence Committee? Congressman Bachmann?
I don't know that that's related at all.
Do you support permanent repeal of Jackson-Vanik? And if so, do you think it will come to the floor before the recess?
I think long-term that it's likely to be repealed, but I think we're waiting for Senate action before we make any decisions on how we move forward. In addition to that, if the administration is serious about expanding trade with the Russians, I think it would be very helpful if they were more forthcoming and would go out and promote what they say they want.
Governor Romney has released the 2010 tax returns and plans to release the rest of 2011. You have not released your returns. Should you release your returns, and should members of Congress release their returns?
I've never released my tax returns. That's my private business, just like it's your own private business.
But why should the standards be different for...
Pardon me?
Why should the standards be different for a presidential candidate?
It shouldn't be. It's a sideshow. That's all it is. The American people are asking the question, where are the jobs? They're not asking where are the tax returns. And it's a sideshow created because the president can't talk about his record. He can't go out and run on his record, so he's got to create these sideshows to try to distract the American people from the real issue that they're concerned about.
Nancy Pelosi has said in an interview with Politico that she's not encouraging Democratic members to go to the convention. She thinks it's time better spent campaigning back in their home districts. Do you share that idea? Do you prefer your members stay home and campaign rather than...
You know, listen, they all got themselves elected to Congress somehow. All right? They can make their own decision about whether they want to go to one convention or the other.
Do you think that says something about the Democratic convention? That she's telling them to stay home and campaign rather than...
I don't know, you'll have to ask her. I don't quite understand. If members want to come to the convention, they're more than welcome to, but I could care less.
Mr. Speaker, in 2008, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, she had submitted a list of some advice to then-candidate Obama for Vice President. She, in particular, spoke highly of Chet Edwards. It's a two-part question. Has the Obama campaign reached out to you for advice on the vice presidential pick?
No.
Have you offered any?
No.
Have they spoken to you about Paul Ryan or anybody
No.
else? Do you have a favorite?
Governor Romney is more than capable of picking his own vice presidential candidate without the interference of a bunch of other politicians.
Mr. Speaker, the Senate keeps talking about potentially doing a stopgap measure for about 6 months to handle both the tax issues and perhaps the sequester. Would you be willing to look at that, to buy more time to figure things out, considering that the Senate is not going to go in the same direction as the House?
Well, the House has acted to replace the sequester. We passed a bill in May. It's been sitting over in the Senate since May. The House will vote here in the next a couple of weeks to extend all of the current tax rates and outline our principles for reforming our tax code next year. I would hope that the Senate would act. There's no reason to wait until after the election to deal with what's a very serious issue.
If they don't act, would you support a stopgap measure into next year?
Well, the House has acted. I'm not going to, I don't want to speak for the Senate. They need to act. And the sooner they act, the better.
Line item veto, something that the White House wants, you want, some Democrats, some in the Senate want. Why do you think this is not going to happen? Who's to blame?
Listen, I've long supported the line item veto. But if anybody thinks this is some silver bullet that's going to solve our financial crisis, they're kidding themselves. We don't have earmarks anymore. And so, you know, the need for something like a line item veto is lessened. But I would still support giving the President the line item veto. I always have. But what we really need is we need a President who will lead and lead our country. We've got a $1.3 trillion budget deficit this year, a $16 trillion national debt. We have a sequester that's about to hollow out our military. And yet the President's been campaigning since last Labor Day. He's checked out. I think what the American people want from their elected representatives here in Washington, from the President to all of us, is to deal with the issues confronting our country. We're here ready, willing, and able.
Speaker, a number of defense contractors have warned that they may issue warn letters before the election, giving notice of layoffs and all that. How concerned are you and the Republicans about something like that? And who does that pressure more, do you think, the President or the Republicans?
I've heard rumors to the effect that these letters are likely to come. I think it's important for the Office of Management and Budget in the administration to come forward and to outline to the American people just how they intend to implement the sequester. Because right now there are more unanswered questions than there are answered questions with regard to how the sequester will work and where the cuts will come from. But remember one thing, we have this sequester because the President of the United States, for his own convenience, only wanted to deal with the debt limit once before the election. And it was the President and the Majority Leader in the Senate who promised to work with us to make sure that we got an outcome out of the Super Committee. They did nothing to help. Matter of fact, I would argue they worked to undermine the work of the Super Committee, and thus we have the sequester. It is time for them to lead.
Thank you.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi used her briefing on Capitol Hill today to accuse House Republicans of holding middle-class tax cuts hostage for tax cuts for the wealthy. The Minority Leader called on House Speaker John Boehner to have a markup of its tax extension legislation.
Good morning. Yesterday, I joined our distinguished House Democratic Whip, Steny Hoyer, our Assistant Democratic Leader, Mr. Clyburn, and Ranking Member Levin, in a letter, a Ranking Member of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Levin, and sending a letter to Speaker Boehner and Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp, asking for a markup of tax cut legislation for the middle-income tax cuts. Everyone agrees that we should have a middle-income tax cut. Tax legislation will soon be brought to the floor. We think a matter of this magnitude should have a markup in committee, where both parties can offer amendments and that we can have a full discussion in committee before it comes to the floor. The middle-income tax cut is something, again, that the President has put forth that we all agree should happen. Tax cuts for everyone up to $250,000 a year. That means if you make more than that, you still get a tax cut up to that level of income. So everyone gets a tax cut. It appears that the Republicans have made their choice. They're not going to have, hopefully they will have a markup, but so far we don't see evidence of it. They've made their decision that they're going to hold these middle-income tax cuts hostage to tax cuts for the wealthiest people in our country. 98% of the American people will benefit from these middle-income tax cuts. In fact, 100% will benefit. But the other 2% will get an additional benefit under the Republican plan. It increases the deficit. It does not create jobs. It does not take us forward in the growth that we need in our economy. Excuse me. From what we have heard, where obviously jobs are the preeminent concern that we have. It's an answer to every family's challenge. Jobs, 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 jobs. So our focus has been on jobs, on middle-income tax cuts, and on fiscal soundness. We have heard from the minutes of the Fed and statements of the Fed chair and the rest that some of the headwinds that the growth of our economy is facing, the growth is facing, relate to the availability of credit, what's happening in the housing market, what's happening overseas, and fiscal stability. Fiscal stability is something Congress can do something about, and we can do something about it now. We can do something about it now. We can't wait until, why should we wait until a lame duck, when that certainty is really important to America's workers, America's families, America's businesses, to our economy. So we would hope that by having a markup, we'll hear the arguments on each side, go to the floor, choice will be made, but the fact is, beyond the tax cuts and the jobs, the growth, the certainty that will spring from that, all of that contributes to our fiscal stability. It's really necessary. We should be about it now. If you want me to, I'll talk more about where we are. August 1st, you know, 1 year ago, almost 1 year ago, August 1st, we had the vote on the floor. It was about lifting the debt ceiling, but in order to do that, Republicans insisted on the Budget Control Act. 174 of them voted for it, including the Speaker of the House, Mr. Boehner, and the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor. They both voted for that, 174. It established a cap on spending, took us forward, sent us to the table of a super committee in order to come forth with a package for growth, for deficit reduction, and to avoid sequestration. As I say, 174 Republicans voted for that, and it wasn't long before, of course, the super committee did not succeed because they would not include revenue. We knew there had to be cuts. We knew we needed growth as part of growing the economy and producing revenue, and we needed revenue. You know what happened then. We're in the situation we are in 1 year later. Let's make this a better summer. Let's, by August 1st, pass the middle-income tax cuts to remove all doubt that that's the path we're going to go down without holding them hostage to those high-income tax cuts, which, again, increase the deficit and do not create jobs. Any questions?
Madam Leader.
I
Yes.
can talk about fiscal stability as we get later in the year here. One of the appropriations bills that was not successfully marked up last year is the Labor H bill. There's a lot of, social issues in that bill, as you know, which sometimes are controversial. But one of the issues in that bill this year is to defund the Affordable Care Act. Many Republicans have sent a letter to the Speaker saying that they would not, urging him not to put a bill on the floor that would not defund the health care law. How do you see that issue playing out as we get to the fall, when we get to September 30th, and forcing the issue of keeping government open?
Well, when you say social issues in the bill, are you referring to the fact that they want to defund Planned Parenthood? Is that the social issue? What other one would you name?
Well, with the health care.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an economic and a health issue. I just didn't know what you meant by social issue. The defunding of Planned Parenthood, which is part of what their markup was about, was it yesterday?
Yes.
Did they officially mark up yesterday? That was what I know was in the mix. I didn't know if they were finished with that markup. It would be interesting to see if they're even able to bring a labor HHS bill to the floor. The simple fact that is a bill about jobs, it's about education, it's about our workforce, it's about the health and well-being, the national funding of the National Institutes of Health and all that implies in terms of research about the CDC and prevention. It's about so many things that are central to the well-being of the American people. And yet they have cut, I think, about, I haven't seen the final product, but about $6 billion from that bill in order to fund some of their other endeavors. All of this at the expense of the health, education, and jobs for the American people. So you'll have to talk to the Speaker, and you soon will.
66, the amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on the Fourth Amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, on which the further proceedings were postponed, which the nays were prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Fourth Amendment offered by Ms. Lee of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted a sufficient number having risen.